All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We're going to continue our discussion on the immune system by picking up today with your second line of defense. And so this is what we would classify as your innate or your natural immunity in the sense that it is something that a much greater diversity of organisms, first off, actually have. Um, Not all organisms have the third line of defense or the adaptive immunity that we'll talk about later, but a lot more of them do have this natural immunity. Uh, Also, it's not going to single out specific pathogens, so it has no capacity to distinguish, um, say, the flu from the common cold, from an E. coli bacteria. It's just going to kind of attack everything in the same manner. That being said, it is much quicker to respond, doesn't require previous exposure to be effective-ish. But the flip side to it is that it doesn't remember things. So when we look at the types of cells and responses that get involved here, just keep in mind that it's not going to matter what kind of pathogen you're encountering. It's also, as a result, not going to involve those lymphocytes, those B or T cells, but we'll utilize some other white blood cells in this process. So when we do look at what's being employed in your natural immunity or your innate immune response, we will talk about another subset of leukocytes, your white blood cells, and those white blood cells will attack pathogens either via phagocytosis or some other kind of direct attack method. You also include your inflammatory response, which also can incorporate fever as part of your innate immune response. And then your cells are capable of producing a handful of things called antimicrobial proteins that will also be part of this line of defense as well. So let's start taking a look at what these pieces do. So remember your white blood cells, right? Your leukocytes, your WBCs, are really kind of hanging out and roaming through your bloodstream, through your interstitial fluid, or what you may also call your tissue fluid, and in and around your lymphatic system. So, in and out of your bloodstream, in and out of your lymphatic ducts, lymph nodes, that kind of thing. Now, the white blood cells that we're talking about here, that are part of your innate immune response, the non-specific cells are things like your macrophages, your neutrophils, eosinophils and basophils, as well as your natural killer cells. So let's sort of look at what these guys look like and what they do. So your macrophages, these are your big eaters. These are the ones that are going to go through that process of phagocytosis. So kind of think of these guys as your cleanup crew. So they're going to take in any sort of major particles, whether they're pathogenic or just cell debris, take those guys in via phagocytosis, which again, remember, phagocytosis is a specific type of endocytosis. Um, we'll bring them in, they'll end up in a food vacuole. We'll merge those guys with lysosomes. Those lysosomes contain those digestive enzymes that will then break these guys down, and then we'll release any indigestible residue and waste via exocytosis. Part of this will also be for those phagocytotic vessels to recognize antigens and actually become, some of them will become what we call antigen presenting cells when we do get to your third line of defense, so keep that in mind as well. Essentially what they'll do is take some of the antigens off of that pathogen that it has ingested and will present or push those antigens into its own cell membrane so that it can then go to those B and T cells that are part of your specific response system, your adaptive response system, and present those antigens and say, hey, this is what's floating around in our body, this is what's causing us problems, so that those B and T cells can learn what that is and be able to mount a more specific response. Neutrophils are also phagocytotic cells. They're a little smaller and more numerous than your typical phagocytotic cells, but these guys are, rather than just working through lysozymes and digestive enzymes in their cells, they will actually release chemicals similar to the chemical composition of bleach. That will actually kill the engulfed pathogen. However, in the process of the way that these guys take in those cells and do that digestion, those chemicals also kill off the neutrophil itself. So it's sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Martyring process, right? So they will take in that pathogen, kill off the pathogen, but in the process, take themselves out as well.
Neutrophils are white blood cells that hunt and kill bacteria. In this spread, a neutrophil is seen in the midst of red blood cells. Staphylococcus aureus bacteria have been added. The small clump of bacteria release a chemoattractant that is sensed by the neutrophil. The neutrophil becomes polarized and starts chasing the bacteria. The bacteria, bounced around by thermal energy, move in a random path, seeming to avoid their predator. Eventually, the neutrophil catches up with the bacteria and engulfs them by phagocytosis.
Your eosinophils and basophils, these guys are generally too small to actually engulf those pathogens. So these guys generally aren't phagocytotic cells, but what they will do is that they will surround the pathogen that they come across and release chemicals in your body that will elicit some sort of violent vascular response. So cause you to sneeze, cause you to vomit, cause you to have diarrhea. And the whole idea is just to surround this guy and get it out. And by creating those responses, that's one way that they can do that, is to just get this thing out of your body by expelling it. And then your natural killer cells, these are lymphocyte-like cells. So they're sort of white blood cells, but sort of not. But these guys are interesting because they specifically will target infected cells that are infected with viruses. So keep in mind that when viruses come into your body, remember that they are intracellular parasites. Meaning that they are within your cells replicating and causing problems. So in order to detect them, your body has to recognize that they have become these virus factories. Good news is a lot of viruses, when they start replicating and start synthesizing themselves, will actually push certain antigens out on the surface of your cells that they are currently infecting. And so your natural killer cells are out looking for those antigens that don't belong on your cells but are being presented there anyway. They also are going to go after cancer cells, and cancer cells, at least in a certain stage of their development, will do a similar thing by presenting antigens on the surface of those cancer cells that aren't normal, that aren't what your body typically would be producing. And so these natural killer cells are looking for these abnormal antigens on your cells and will go to those cells and destroy them. They actually cause the lysing of your own cells' membranes by punching a bunch of holes basically into the infected cells or the cancer cells, and they will destroy them. They're not actual lymphocytes in the sense that they don't actually mature in your thymus. So they're lymphocyte-like, but because they don't mature in your thymus, that's why they're not considered lymphocytes. And the other interesting thing about these guys is they have no actual surface receptors. Unlike the vast majority of cells in your body, in order for them to communicate and coordinate, cells generally have surface receptors to do that, and these guys don't, which is kind of an interesting little tidbit there. And so this is what they're going to do. They're going to go and find that target cell, whether it's a cell that is connected or infected, I should say, with a virus, or like in the picture, here's a cancer cell, and it will go to that cell and it will create these perforin containing pockets, little vesicles full of this compound called perforin. And those perforin molecules then assemble into the target cell's membrane and basically produce holes. And so your cytoplasm just leaks out of that. It's kind of like punching a bunch of holes into a water balloon, and you can just watch the water just spill out.